The seventh reason is moral problems. So there's a problem from medicine in that should we treat diseases that are affecting people, hereditary diseases, because they might slow down human evolution. There's a problem around sexuality because we're now having multiple genders, we're having homosexuality and things like that. And these things cannot reproduce. So the question must be asked, why would multiple genders and homosexuality evolve if evolution is true? I once asked this to an evolutionist and he said, evolution must realize that we're overpopulated. And so I said, well, is evolution therefore making sure that the least fit among us are not able to reproduce? And he was kind of like, ooh, walked into that one.
So obviously I have some problems with this because evolutionary theory doesn't have anything to do with morality. Evolution doesn't describe anything about morality. Evolution just describes the diversity of organisms on this earth and how organisms can diversify and the reasons why they diversify and the different selection pressures that go into the diversification of a group of organisms. And I don't understand the second point, either of these points that he's already gone over, and I don't understand the rest of them. In this particular context either, but for medicine, like this is not a question that's being had in like evolutionary theory or in the evolutionary biology. Like there's no question about whether or not we should be treating genetic diseases or finding cures for different diseases out there. Like nobody has any kind of conflict over that. We should definitely develop medicine to help people. And then finally, sexuality. First of all, gender is a social construct. So, I mean, we created this whole idea of gender. Now, as far as sex goes, sex has always been very diverse in the animal kingdom, but the animal kingdom has multiple different types of genetic versions of sex that can be expressed. And also referring to the LGBTQ community as things, like these things can't reproduce. Like, I don't know how that's supposed to factor into evolution other than you try to tie it to reproducing, like homosexual people can't reproduce, which isn't exactly correct. There's a bit of nuance there. They can reproduce, just not in the traditional way that this guy thinks. But still, I mean, referring to the LGBTQ community as things just puts you in a very shitty light there, buddy. But no, sexuality doesn't have anything to do with evolution as far as evolution being unreasonable or a reason why it's false. Evolution can still occur even if there's a complex and diverse view of sexuality.
We also have questions around theft, murder, genocide, and rape. Are these things okay in an evolutionary system? If it's survival of the fittest, if it's I must survive and pass my genes on to the next generation, surely all of these things are okay. And also,
so none of those things apply to evolution, and that's a very poor understanding of what the survival of the fittest is. So again, I don't know how in the fuck you could get here from evolutionary biology, because survival of the fittest is about which organism is best adapted for the environment that it exists within. So if we had an environment where theft, murder, genocide, rape would benefit, then I guess those things would allow those particular individuals to survive and thrive and propagate in the system, but we don't live in that kind of system now, do we? But ultimately, evolution just describes how organisms change over time to best adapt to the environment they exist in. Theft, murder, genocide, rape, morality in general has no effect here. And I feel like this can be remedied by you just taking a second and really trying to understand evolution instead of trying to find reasons not to accept evolution.
Racism, I want to highlight racism a little bit more. Here are two quotes, one from Darwin, one from Hitler.
Well, fuck. So 7 was moral problems. 8 is, again, moral problems, but more specifically racism. This is just one point spread out over many slides. You did that with point 6. You had many slides in there, but you didn't break that out into separate things. Why is now moral problems continued on to point 8 being racism? Also, I'd like to point out more fucking quote mining here. Way to go there, dipshit.
And I've highlighted some things in red. Darwin's title, this is his title of his book, On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. And most people don't realize that the full title includes the word or the preservation of favored races. What does he mean by that?
So he's asking what this phrase preservation of favored races mean. And he's trying to connect that to this idea of racism. That's not what that phrase meant or at least that's not what Darwin meant by that phrase. What he was trying to describe is the process of natural selection, meaning that organisms that had traits that allowed them to survive in the environment would make them survive in the environment. This was not a racist part of his title, although at the time that Darwin lived, racism was the norm. What we would consider racism now was just normal ways of thinking in Darwin's time. So you can't exactly compare our modern sense of racism to the social norms of Darwin's day.
In the struggle for life, Hitler was influenced by Darwin, and he wrote here, if nature does not wish that weaker individuals should mate with stronger, she wishes even less that a superior race should intermingle with an inferior one, because in such a case, all her efforts through hundreds of years to establish an evolutionary higher stage of being may thus be rendered futile. So Hitler believed in the Aryan race, a superior race. He believed that blacks and Jews were at the lower spectrum and needed to be wiped out in order for humanity to be cleansed and to progress.
So just because somebody can understand evolution and use it for nefarious means doesn't mean that evolution is somehow racist. It doesn't mean that evolution is somehow inherently racist. Even if Darwin was a racist, that doesn't mean that evolution is racist. Like, for instance, I can have a hammer and I can know that the hammer is used to build things, to hammer in nails, or potentially destroy things, like destroy walls or something, like in the case of a sledgehammer. But you can also understand how that hammer can be used to like murder somebody. That doesn't mean that that's the proper use for the hammer. It just means somebody used something for nefarious means. And that's what Adolf Hitler was doing in his understanding of evolutionary biology. This does not disprove evolution. Evolution still occurs even if people misuse the idea of evolution.
As well as this, here's another quote from Darwin. At some future period, not very distant as measured by centuries, the civilized races of man will almost certainly exterminate and replace the savage races throughout the world. Who are the civilized races? White Europeans. Who are the savage races? Africans and South Americans and people like that. And so evolution, as proposed by Darwin, is inherently racist.
So again, he's quote mining Charles Darwin. And like I said before, the social norm at that time was racism, was viewing people in that kind of way. So regardless of whether or not Darwin was actually a racist or that he was actually saying that quote unquote savages were going to get wiped out by modern men or civilized men or whatever, like that doesn't detract from the fact that evolution still occurs. And we have a better understanding of evolution after Darwin's day. We have built upon Darwin's idea and developed this similar but yet different idea about evolution. We understand it better. So it really doesn't matter where it comes from, being, Darwin. And this makes me think of the fact that this is a genetic fallacy. He's trying to tie evolution to this idea that Darwin was this unabashed racist, which again was the social norm at the time, to be a fucking racist.
Here is a picture of the human zoo. This is in North America, and we've got a savage race being watched by the civilized race to see how these savages behaved. These were believed to be more ape-like, and the same thing was done to Aborigines all over Europe and North America. And here's another screenshot from a video. I'll post a link to Darwin's impact on society. And here's a quote from biologist Edward East. Nature eliminates the unfit and preserves the fit. It is man who has caused all the trouble. He has put his whole soul into saving the unfit. So in other words, we should just let those who are weakest die. We shouldn't treat them medically. We should progress onto a stage of higher being, like Hitler said.
No, I mean, you can't say that exactly. Like you can't say that is what that person was talking about. It's yet another quote mine. This entire section of this video is just filled with quote mining bullshit.